I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm your co-host, Matt Bernico.
And I'm your other co-host, Dean Detloff, co-host and co-author this time around.
Oh, me too. Folks, this week you're hearing our podcast, and we have some great news. For months, years even, we've been talking about a very cool book that we've been writing. But this week, it's out. If you've pre-ordered the book, you probably already have it. If you didn't pre-order the book, there's still time to do so. You can go to fortresspress.com or any other website basically out there that sells books. Somebody even told us it was on the Target.com, Target website.
Right. So funny.
So get your Starbs, get your book about degrowth. I don't know. Anyways, you should order it. It's $24 US, slightly more Canadian dollars, slightly less Great British pounds, but you should buy it either way. And then once you're done buying it, you should go to Jeff Bezos' awful hell site, Amazon.com, and review it. Or even go do it on Goodreads, which I think is also owned by Amazon, but feels slightly less gross. And tell everyone how great you think it is. So get out there, get this book. It's out in the world. Isn't that crazy? I am astounded.
Yeah, some people already have it. I can't believe that. Friends of mine are DMing me photos of it. It is driving me up the wall, but I expect to have it in my own hands very soon, and then I'll read it and discover all the things I wish I would have said differently. That is the exciting thing about being an author. This time around, though, to celebrate the book coming out, we decided we are going to talk about the book itself, how we wrote it, and maybe some things that we've thought since writing it, because even though it's coming out now, we finished the first draft of it, I don't know, not quite a year ago, but almost, pretty close. Some of the chapters were written exactly a year ago. Yeah. And we have thought a lot more since then. And this is maybe also a way of kind of getting people excited about the book without giving it all away. Although, I don't know, if you listen to this podcast, you've heard it all before, but now you can hold it in book form. So that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think I've said this on the podcast before. I'm going to say it again right now. We have talked about this book quite a bit throughout the last year or so, though a lot of that content that we've talked about in the past has not made it into the final book. So you might be surprised when you open this thing up and the things that you were really excited about reading are not in there. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Okay, so like Dean said, in this episode, we're going to try to celebrate having this book out in the world a little bit by giving you a peek behind the curtain and let you know, I don't know, some of the behind the scenes stuff about this book, maybe some of the context around writing it, why we did write it, all this kind of stuff. And hopefully that will be kind of a good pitch for you to pick it up yourself if you haven't already. And then we'll also, just have a quick conversation about other things that we've learned since. Dean, why did we write this book? Why did we do this to ourselves?
It's a great question. I think there's an uninteresting answer and an interesting answer, and I'll start with the uninteresting one, and then I'll say the interesting one. The uninteresting one is that we had a friend, Daniel Camacho, who got a job at Fortress Press and asked if we had anything cooking books-wise. And believe it or not, we didn't. So we decided, well, we should not let that opportunity pass, so we decided to make up a book. And the book that we pitched originally is very different than the book that came out, which is a natural process, I guess, of editing and so on. But that's the uninteresting reason. We had an opportunity and we took it, and we're good entrepreneurs that way. That's how we're surviving in capitalism. But the more interesting answer is, we have thought over the years about what would it mean to turn some of the content of the Magnificast into a book. And we've had many ideas for what that could look like. And lots of other podcasts also have books that are sort of like, I don't know, podcast name The Book, and it's just a handful of like inside jokes or whatever. And we didn't really want to do that per se, but we wanted to do something that felt familiar, like could sort of draw on the research we've done, the work that we've done, the conversations that we've been having. And I think that is kind of what the book ended up being. Like, we wrote it because we were both mad about the climate crisis and thinking a lot about liberation theology. And we felt like, a lot of the work that we do on the show is to try to help Christians get their heads around capitalism explicitly as a thing that is driving the climate crisis, and as a thing that liberation theologians have, analyzed in really like important and clear ways. So we thought, well, maybe this book is an opportunity to kind of keep leaning into that effort on the show. So I don't know. I feel like that's why I wanted to write the book, Matt, to distill the podcast into book form and maybe accomplish its goal in a different medium. I don't know. What about you? Why did you want to write this book with me, Matt?
Well, we had the opportunity. That was a big one. I remember. Okay, we did pitch the book, the more political economy oriented book, the first time around, and they were like, I don't know, not quite what we are looking for. And I remember I was visiting you up in Canada. It was right before I moved, and we were like, what should we do instead? And I was thinking, I don't know. We were walking somewhere, and I was like, we should write a book about St. Francis and degrowth. And you're like, oh yeah, that's a very good idea. So that was, I think that idea started us down the whole path of enough is enough. And I think it's really interesting to figure out exactly how we pivoted from like the more St. Francis centered idea to a more liberation theology focused idea. And I think it was a good choice. But I think like that is part of the reason why I wanted to write this book, is that there are, so many radical ideas within the tradition of, Franciscanism, the tradition of like people reading St. Francis, the tradition of liberation theologies reading St. Francis. I felt really grasped by that idea at the time, and I still feel pretty grasped by that idea now. He's a weird guy with a lot of weird ideas, and I think that they're great. Let's feed these birds out there on Christmas and talk about how money is poop and evil, and it's great. Lots of interesting things going on with St. Francis. So I don't know. I think for me, it's just like kind of feeling grasped by a particular idea, and then thinking, well, we could kind of fit in the political economy stuff that we wanted to do in with that broader topic that might be more interesting to publishers and readers.
Yeah, that's true. Some fun background to the book. I guess the original pitch that we gave was kind of like a capitalism 101 for Christians. That was like the idea of the book. This is the one that was rejected by the publisher, rightly or wrongly, who could say. But the pitch was to basically be like, we're going to take the time to explain how capitalism operates in a way that Christians can kind of understand and metabolize. And it didn't go that way, which is fine. So then we thought maybe St. Francis is at least like a very interesting and fun topic for us to look at. And maybe that's the book we're going to be chasing for the rest of our lives. I feel like similarly, there is so much stuff there. Matt and I read a ton of stuff about St. Francis of Assisi. And I guess the kind of radical Franciscan tradition, we even wrote, like, Matt especially wrote a good chunk of a chapter that is no longer in the book about St. Francis. So we did a lot of work for it, but in the end, it kind of felt like we were shoehorning some of that stuff. And what we really wanted to talk about was the stuff that we had initially pitched, this political economy stuff. And so liberation theology became the way to, like, make that a book for Christians, I guess, in a way that St. Francis was not coming as naturally to like facilitate that other goal of doing political economy stuff. But it's out there. There's fragments out there. Actually, a lot of stuff that was left on the cutting room floor of this book specifically, even after we pivoted to something else. But the St. Francis stuff, I don't know. Maybe one day we'll come back to it. Maybe we'll make a cool zine out of it, I could say.
Yeah, the St. Francis stuff is so interesting because there are so many radical ideas, so many things that I think are really important for people to think through with regard to the environment and the economy, but like also extremely hard to systematize as like this is a political approach or something, because it's just not. It's just not that. It's just a guy who's pretty weird So I don't know. Without without extrapolating it and bastardizing it into all kinds of other things that is not St. Francis, it's just hard to kind of do. So I think we made the right choice to kind of pivot away from that stuff. But St. Francis is a very interesting person nonetheless. Pretty cool.
I feel like it also would have been a book for no one. Like just a very extremely small subset of people interested in that. So anyway, we'll figure that out later. We'll talk about the content of the book in a minute here. But I don't know, do you want to talk about the writing of the book? I feel like a lot of people have asked me what it's like to write with another person, and I still don't know. So it will help me out for us to process it together.
This is not a dig at you, but you were mentioning a minute ago how like I wrote a pretty big part of a chapter about St. Francis, and then it got kind of left behind on the cutting room floor. And I think that is that's not my experience writing the book, because I think a lot of the things I wrote did make it in. but I feel like I did. There's more than one occasion where I wrote a bunch of stuff, and then it's just like, this isn't quite right. But we didn't know it wasn't quite right until I'd already written it. So it was like I had to get like the wrong take out first before you could come through and be like, okay, this is the actual right way, and then you would sort of reorient some of it. So it was great. I felt like my role sometimes in the writing process was the barrier remover. I would just write something, and then you'd be like, maybe not that, and then you would take it in a different direction. And I think that's great. Great to have that role on the team.
Yeah, it was funny. I mean, like, we wrote the first chapter, a draft of it, and basically what we would do, we'd outline a chapter, and then we would give each other sections of that chapter to write. So it'd be like, I'm excited to write about this thing, or I've read about this, whatever. And so then we'd write it, and then we would both go over each other's sections and like edit it or pad it out or whatever. And then I would go through at the very end and try to like smooth it out into like one editorial voice, I guess. So we gave the first draft of the first chapter to my wife, and I was like, what do you think? And she's like, it's great. The content's really good. I know exactly when you're writing and exactly when Matt's writing. And I was like, oh no, this is a book by a two-headed ogre, and we need to fix that problem. Yeah. So that was all really interesting, and I think in the end it flows pretty well. I don't know, there are probably still some seams that are maybe easy to see, and hard too to judge what's necessary and unnecessary. Even when I look at it now, there are some chapters where I'm like, maybe we could have crunched that a bit more or been a little more judicious, but our editor at Fortress didn't seem to mind, so I guess that's the professional. But yeah, it is complicated to write a book with two people. It also made me think, we do so much thinking together through the Magnificast, and maybe that's what the book ultimately expresses the most, is like, I feel like this is like a path of two people trying to sort out how all this stuff goes together. Degrowth, capitalism, and liberation theology. And the writing of it is actually like kind of secondary to all that. It's just the final form that has been crystallized into, but it really feels like a collective achievement over a lot of years of thinking. And I think that's what I'm most proud of in the book, is that it feels like something we could only have done together.
Yeah, I agree. I think that makes sense. I also, I mean, kind of along that point, the things in this book are like more or less new. But by that I mean nobody else has written this book. This is not like a riff off of anyone else's work. This is like a lot of new writing on liberation theology and how it fits into economics and degrowth, especially. There's not like, I don't know, there's not like a big definitive book out there. I mean, maybe there is, but it's more of if it is out there, it's an academic book. There's not like a big thing out there that's just out there to tell you exactly what liberation theologians think of economics explicitly, like as economic thinkers themselves. And I think our book does fill that gap as for like in a popular market. So that's pretty cool. The other thing I think that's quite interesting, though, is that even though a lot of this comes out of the podcast, a lot of this comes out of the conversations we have on the show, I don't feel like any of it is like recycling that content. Like, we're not just playing the greatest Magnificast hits about the gospel and soul and tename or whatever. We're I guess, which is to say, we're not doing the thing that we do on this podcast every single week, where we kind of like bring up our favorite weird Christian guys. This is all like new content, so it feels like a natural outgrowth of the Magnificast, but it does not feel like it's recycling the same content the Magnificast uses.
Yeah, that's true. And it's not like a book report book, which is sometimes what the Magnificast can be, for better or for worse. Like, we read this thing and we're here to tell you about it or think with it or whatever.
Right.
It does feel like, I don't know, here's the metabolization of all the stuff, all the book reports that we have done, and then put to work in a different way. And you're right, like, there isn't, surprisingly, there's not one systematic study, at least in English, of the kind of economic theory behind liberation theology, which I guess would be hard to do because, whatever, liberation theology is a family of people, family of discourses who don't all agree. But even the stuff that we did find working out the kind of economic stuff in a systematic way is sort of buried in like an essay or a book chapter or a liberation theologian trying to summarize it for other liberation theologians, like lots of little fragmentary pieces. And it's not like we provide a grand unified theory of liberation theology economics either. But I think that we do maybe help seize on some of the themes that seem common across the kind of liberation theology spectrum when it comes to identifying growth in particular as a big problem in the global South. That like the South, the economies there are not allowed to grow on their own terms. And the terms they are growing on, insofar as they grow at all, are in order to facilitate an even greater exploitative extractive growth in the global North.
Mm.
And I think that's like, you know, that's like a point that people get about liberation theology. Everybody knows that they dealt with dependency theory and all that kind of stuff. But to kind of, you know, seize on that point in particular, it helps you really foreground the fact that liberation theology was severely concerned with like the process of capital accumulation on a world scale, whether you're, you know, Pablo Richard in Chile or, you know, Tissa Balasuria in Sri Lanka, or you're like, I don't know, a handful of theologians across Africa or Cameroon. Like, there's this like really intentional look at growth. So I'm hopeful that the book actually like maybe even encourages folks to look a little more closely at the kind of economic stuff going on in liberation theology.
Yeah, totally. I think it's even if you like are not a Christian, or if you're not a person really interested in religious practice or spirituality or something, I feel like there's something very interesting in here about the economic critique that is probably appealing to just people on the left generally. So there you go. give this book to your favorite weird left-wing person in your family and say, here's some weird stuff. Right. Okay, hang on. I do want to I guess correct one thing that I've just said. I said that this book is all new stuff, and it's not just recycling Magnificast content, and that is true, except there is one chapter that's called Christian Tools for Conviviality. We can talk more about it in a little bit, but that does have some of the greatest hits from Magnificast in it.
That's true.
About Thomas Munzer and, you know, Gerard Winstanley and stuff, but that's fine. I'll give ourselves a pass. I'll give us a pass on it because I think it is packaged in a sort of different way than we talk about in the podcast. But anyways, that's fine. Dean, let's talk about the content of this book so people can know what it is they're getting into. We'll talk about the content, but we're not going to get too spoilery. We don't want to ruin this for anybody.
That's right. All right. So the book proceeds like this. We talk about the idolatry of the GDP. We have talked about many of these themes on episodes in the past, but as we said, they're finally kind of put to paper in a more systematic way. That chapter was really fun to write, looking at, I don't know, how to make idolatry work as a theological but also an economic category. So that's a really fun chapter. I'll just talk through these chapters quick, Matt, and then I'll ask you a question about them.
Okay.
The second chapter, we're talking about capitalism, growth, and liberation theology. And in that one, we're really trying actually to kind of present Marx's theory of capital accumulation in a way that doesn't seem very scary and hopefully feels like it makes sense of the very weird world that we're in. We talked to about the dynamics of imperialism that kind of externalize the cost of capitalism to poor and marginalized people in the global South in particular. So that one was maybe one of the hardest to write, but very interesting. The third chapter is really on capitalism and climate change. We called it the dirge and the canticle. That's some good St. Francis stuff that comes in there. It's the chapter where we talk about Laudato Si, we talk about green capitalism. A lot of stuff we've looked at on the show in the past. Andreas Malm makes an appearance in there, and Wim Carton, Brett Christophers, some other folks. So really trying to deal with climate change and kind of the economic barriers to defeating it. In the fourth chapter, we finally talk about degrowth and liberation and try to present what degrowth is and isn't. We wade into some of the annoying internet misconceptions about what degrowth is, but also, more interestingly, try to talk about how liberation theology in the global south was already anticipating degrowth, and how maybe some theologians in the north were sort of responding to that critique long before degrowth was ever a term that we used to kind of collect these discourses. So that was a really fun chapter, and I guess it's sort of the main core of the book in a way. The 5th chapter, as you said, this is the Magnificast Greatest Hits chapter, Christian Tools for Conviviality. We tried to sort of express that Christianity has these tools for living in a world without growth as the main objective, and in fact even as tools for criticizing growth. So we talk about the Bible Jubilee, we do some Frederick Herzog stuff with the Parable of the Talents, there's some stuff on the communism of consumption and production. These are all Magnificast Greatest Hits. It's a good chapter, I think. And then lastly, we have maybe what's my favorite chapter in the book, which is Life is Worthless. It's a very short chapter. The title came from an interview we did with Leonardo Boff for this book, where that is what he said. We thought that was a really fun thing to explore. And in that chapter, we're trying to sort of think through, like, what would it mean to not filter the whole world through the, like, weird metaphysic of capitalist value schemes? And what if we just kind of let the world be what it is and didn't try to make it profitable or valuable in some way or other? So that is maybe the one chapter where we let ourselves get a little, like, theological, or give ourselves permission to get silly and goofy at the end of the book. So that was very fun to write. That's the basic summary of the book here. Matt, the thing I want to ask you is, was there something in writing this book, in any of these chapters, that you found particularly surprising or interesting, where you were like, okay, I have an idea of what I'm going to do here, but in the course of writing it, you know, something else kind of came up and got more interesting that you hadn't anticipated?
Whoa. Yeah, I think so. Definitely. Okay, so this is slightly behind the... I don't want to keep referring back to the way we wrote the book, but I'm going to do it again. So the first 2 chapters, the first one is about idolatry and GDP, and the second one is about capitalism. Those 2 chapters have a long, weird history of being like of being twins. They were one chapter. We split it into 2 chapters. We put them back together as one chapter again. We moved, chunks of it from one to the other, trying to figure out exactly how to how those 2 chapters should work and like support one another as making in explaining capitalism. And I think like when we first started writing those 2 bits, they were really heavy on political economy. They were really heavy on like the monthly review, Paul Sweezy, Paul Brand kind of stuff. And that was cool. And that seemed like the thing to talk about at the time. But that all changed when we started working more liberation theology in. Once we kind of really hit a stride and we brought Pablo Richard into the mix and really like invested in the idea of idolatry as being central to explaining GDP, I think it really started working a lot better, and it was way more interesting than just like, I don't know, more of a dry explanation of political economy. I think, yeah, so that first chapter, it went from something that was like very straightforward and maybe like not super theologically oriented to being something that I think is actually extremely theologically profound, in the way that it thinks of idolatry as explicitly an economic type of sin or something in the world. Yeah, that was definitely I think like the most interesting thing we got into. Not overall. There's a lot of other interesting stuff too. Don't let me say that's the only interesting thing in this book. There's so much great stuff, but that was the thing that like really got me going at the beginning of the book, I think. Dean, yeah. What do you think? What's your answer to the question?
Well, I think similarly, that was a really fun, exciting thing to kind of discover, like to let liberation theology be the thing that actually binds together the text. I mean, it seems like an obvious choice, but it's not when you're in the weeds of trying to do boring economic stuff. And that's thanks to our editor, Bethany, who was really good, I thought, actually extremely helpful. She would be reading this book and she'd be like, this is good content, but like, where's the Christianity in it? Where's the kind of like hook for a Christian reader, which was often a very fair question. We'd be like, oh yeah, we kind of forgot about that. We were too busy talking about monopoly capital or something. And so that was really, really good and useful. I think the other thing that I found really interesting writing it was actually rediscovering the liberation theology critique of growth itself. I kind of thought at first that maybe we'd have to shoehorn some of that, or like build the hermeneutical bridge a bit more intentionally. I mean, liberation theologians, they're critical of development. They're critical of global economics and capitalism. But I was sort of like, well, what's the work to do to put that into the degrowth conversation? And in the end, it actually wasn't hard at all. Once you start looking for it, there are tons of references to liberation theologians explicitly challenging growth in itself as a kind of idolatrous, usurper of Christian loyalty and so on.
Yeah.
And I think that was like a cool thing to discover. And there are even tons more references that we didn't end up putting in the book. So I think it kind of like uncovered maybe a strategy for rereading liberation theology that I didn't really have before writing the book.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, from this side of things, it does seem so obvious. Like, something that is also interesting in the book that we've kind of pulled through is that, we have people like Pablo Richard and Henk Lamar and all kinds of other liberation theologians who are sorting, like, using idolatry as a frame of reference to talk about economics. But then there are all kinds of like extremely secular people who are also using the word idolatry. And
Right.
just like, I don't know, for some reason it took us kind of a long time to figure this part out. But like, I don't know, Eric Fromm or Timothy Parikh or, all kinds of other people, bring in the word idolatry. And it's like, yeah, they're doing that for a good reason. And maybe it's just up to us to kind of knit these two things together. And easier now that I'm looking at the finished product. But at the moment, when we were writing it, it seemed like it did not seem obvious to me. But I'm glad that we got there.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, here's another question for you. I'm interviewing you, Matt, now on this podcast.
Oh, God.
What do you think was the hardest part, actually, to do in this book? Or the hardest kind of chapter to, like, figure out as we were going? I feel like we might actually have different answers to this.
I think the hardest part, I don't know. Hardest is a hard one. I think the Christian tools for conviviality was actually quite difficult, not because of the content. I think the content all like we said, it's kind of the greatest hits of the Magnificast. All of your favorites are in this one. But figuring out what to include, what to leave out, that was difficult. But also exactly how to fit all of that content into the book in a way that seemed like natural and straightforward. Because it's like we have these first 4 chapters that are all about political economy and sort of the theological element. They're about liberation theology, and then all of a sudden we have this chapter that's just like, here's a bunch of other things that you can use to think about
cool
the world.
Cool stuff you should know.
Yeah, cool stuff that we think you should definitely know, and figuring out how to make sure that like that actually flows in the book and it serves a purpose, like that. All of these tools are additional things you can kind of pick up and use to figure out sort of like the critique of growth that Christianity has, and the way that Christianity has oftentimes been extremely countercultural, standing against other types of Christianity, thinking about economics. I think that was kind of a challenge. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. That was a challenge. Also, in the architectonic outline of this book, chapters 4 and 5 were combined at a certain point, just like chapters 1 and 2. And so that was like a struggle to parse out and figure out where all this content should belong. Yeah, I was actually going to say chapter 4, the degrowth chapter, was the hardest one. I think it depends, because the capitalism chapter was also difficult. It was very labor intensive, but mostly because we just had like too much content all the time, and figuring out like what was essential in that chapter was a challenge. And I think that, in my opinion, that chapter is still kind of the one where that comes through the most, where like there's a bit like too much information going on in that chapter, but it's all good. I don't know, you're just gonna have to get through it. But the 4th chapter on degrowth, I think it was like that question of, what is essential to explain, and then what also can we just sort of like footnote and be like, whatever, if you're mad about this specific idea, or you want to explore this a little bit more, here's some books that do that. We're not going to like take the time to do that. So there were a lot of pieces in that chapter where we had written a paragraph, let's say, about like why degrowth is not austerity. And then we were like, I don't know, man, who cares? Like, it's like, here's some people who talk about that, and you can go read them. We don't really need to rehash that. So I think that took a lot of work to figure out what to do, and it feels like because it's the core chapter of the book in a way, trying to decide what has to be there and what's kind of ornamental or a little bit trivial or whatever. That took a long time. I feel like that chapter had like many iterations.
Yeah,
that was tough.
Yeah, that's true. Now that you're saying that, I do remember like I had this one day I sat in this coffee shop all day long, and I had these like very, very exhaustive explanations of all of the critiques of degrowth, and I was like, this is the important stuff. And it was not the important stuff. Man, that's true. That's a good one. That chapter also, okay, if you are reading the chapter 4 about degrowth and liberation, there is a section about like degrowth socialism. That chapter had so much more in it. That section had so much more in it. There was just like a mountain of content that we wanted to put in there about like about participatory planning and democracy and like whatever. Anyways, go back and listen to our content about Marta Harnecker, or just go read Marta Harnecker. I don't know. Lots of content left on the floor, on the cutting room floor about that as well. But that's fine. I guess it's okay. Though if you want to ask the reverse question, which one was the easiest to write? Okay, so it's chapter 3, the dirge mechanical. So this one, I don't know. I think Dean, you came up with like the controlling metaphor of the dirge and mechanical as sort of like the reference to St. Francis. We knew we wanted to have some like St. Francis, some Pope Francis, some Laudato Si stuff in this one. That was great. We'd written it all out, and then we sent it to the editor, and she said, "This is great." And then there weren't really very many notes in this one. So it's just like, I guess whatever we did in this one, it really worked, and we didn't have to do very many revisions or rewrites or restructurings. So all great. That was very smooth.
Yeah, that's true. That surprisingly was a very light edit in that chapter. Also, yeah, I think like once you decide you're going to write about Pope Francis, it becomes very easy because he just has a lot of good rhetoric, and you can be like, oh, I don't know, that's what the Pope says, so here you go. He says do degrowth. So that was easy. I think at the time, I can't remember what we were doing on the podcast, but we had also just freshly been reading a lot of stuff that we used in that chapter, so it felt easier to write because it was just like more in the front of our brains, like we weren't digging as hard to kind of find the content, so that helped. There was, one thing that was funny about writing that chapter and a few others though is like because that chapter is dealing with climate change, there's lots of like kind of big data points or like studies we refer to, and I'd be like rereading it. So we'd write the chapter and then I'd look at it again 2 weeks later, let's say, after kind of stepping away from it, and I'd be like, oh no, this fact that we quote, there's no way that that's true. That cannot be right. That's crazy. And then I would Google it and I'd be like, oh my God, like this is bad. Climate change is not good. It's true. What we said was true. There's a point in there where we talk about a study that says human beings are creating basically the entire weight of human biomass on the earth in terms of like artificial products. Over like, I forget what it is. It's like an alarming rate. And whatever it was, I was astounded. And I was like rereading it and I was like, no way, that can't be right. And I started like panicking because I think we had sent it even to the publisher at that time. And I was like, oh, this is a major problem. So like, I don't know, it was probably like 2 a.m, like Googling that study. And I was like, oh no. The worst part is we were correct. The worst news is that we don't need to change that. So yeah, that was really interesting, and kind of like doing the fact checking and stuff for a book about climate change, man, it'll really spook you. So that the content was easy to write. It was difficult to absorb.
Yeah. Yeah. That particular study about, like human material culture, the amount of stuff that humans create outweighing the natural world in terms of biomass is nuts. I remember in that part specifically, I was trying to find like a comparison or a metaphor that makes it seem like more manageable. So I was trying to like describe it in like it's like 1.2 million elephants or something like that. And it's like, I remember you left a note where it's just like, this isn't helpful. It's like, yeah, that's true. It's not. 1.2 million elephants isn't any more easy to manage mentally. So let's just get rid of this altogether.
A totally relatable image that one could put in their brain for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there were lots of funny things like that. Okay, let's talk about one of the most exciting things about this book, which is we did have a dialogue with Leonardo Boff, Brazilian liberation theologian. Everybody loves him. You know him. He's the best. He's still out there doing his thing. I had gotten Boff's email years ago through many funny liberation theology contacts, and I used that at that time to write to him to do an interview for G's magazine, which was cool. It came out not long before G's closed, unfortunately, but it was a great issue on solidarity and whatnot. And anyway, it was cool to talk with him. And at the time, I was like, that's neat that I got to talk to Leonardo Boff. I'll probably never talk to him again. And then we had a good occasion to kind of, see. And so I just sort of emailed him out of the blue. And you never know. Like, people are very busy. Leonardo Boff is very busy. He doesn't actually know us really at all. And I kind of half expected him to be like, I don't know, good luck with your project at the end. But we asked him really kindly, like, hey, if we sent you some questions on degrowth and what you think about it, would you reply to us? And he was actually super enthusiastic, and he got his response back to us, like, right away. And it was all very good content that we were able to kind of sprinkle into the book in a few different places. And I actually think having that interview really made the book feel worth doing to me, like, even more than just writing it, just to kind of demonstrate that, like, liberation theology is still an important kind of paradigm. Like, this isn't just literature that's back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and that's kind of where it belongs or died. But you have people like Leonardo Boff who are still out there in the struggle, still thinking about, like, I guess, ways of building solidarity between the North and South in a meaningful way. And in the end, I mean, the rhetoric was so powerful, and the kind of concepts that he gave us really shaped, especially the fourth and sixth chapter, the chapter on degrowth and the chapter on the conclusion, the kind of life is worthless thing. So that was really fun. I was glad that we got to, like, it feels like a contribution we made. We're being like, here's what the two of us think, and that's fine. But here's what Leonardo Boff thinks, and that's actually important to kind of document.
Right. I mean, Leonardo Boff is... he's involved, I think, in the impetus of this book a lot, right? Like I was mentioning earlier, we were interested in St. Francis, but it was like St. Francis through the lens of Cry of the Earth, Cry of the Poor.
Right.
And, that's cool. And we read, you'll find references to that book in ours and other of Boff's books in ours as well. But those are all, like, quite old, written quite a long time ago. So it's cool to have something very current from him in this book too, to kind of like bookend it a bit, right? We have all this sort of like liberation theology stuff from Boff and from others, and then we have, a very recent conversation with him in the book. It would be great to find some other places to put like that full back and forth with him out through. I don't know. We'll figure out that someday.
Maybe we'll turn that into a zine or something one of these days when we have time.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Something like that would be cool.
Yeah. It also kind of made me, like, that discussion made me think, I guess it made me realize how little engagement there is anymore in the Anglophone world with liberation theology, which is too bad. And we've talked about this on the podcast in the past, but, like, it used to be the case that if someone like Leonardo Boff said something important about something going on, it would be translated into English pretty immediately and distributed through a network of church media on the one hand. So you had outlets like National Catholic Reporter or America in particular, who would often kind of seek the opinion of liberation theology. But you'd also have secular outlets. Like, there are so many wild articles of, like, the New York Times reporting on Brazilian liberation theology and what's going on. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, there was just kind of maybe a more cultural understanding of all that stuff, or kind of seeing it as relevant. And I thought, it would have been so interesting to do that kind of, like, almost like journalism, I guess, theology journalism around degrowth with a number of other liberation theologians. And I wish that we'd had more time to do something like that. I mean, maybe that's really a different project entirely, but I think it's kind of, it's a shame, really, truly shameful, I think, that we've kind of allowed the ecosystem that makes liberation theology kind of relevant and matter. We've allowed that to atrophy for lots of different reasons. Some natural, like, religious orders that are responsible for that, and they're aging and declining, and not much you can do about that. But, like, the investment in that kind of reporting has really gone down. editorial instincts don't really point you in that direction. Even like the academy and higher ed, like people sort of moved on to other issues rather than seeing liberation theology as like a fundamental thing. So anyway, all that to say, like doing the interview with Boff, I was like, man, I don't know what it would take to like get people to kind of, to get institutions to rebuild that kind of knowledge and understanding. But it really proved that, there's gold content out there to be grabbed.
It's true. So much great content. Wow. I think there's something that's just like so tragic about that in particular, though, is that there is a quality to liberation theology, especially when it comes to someone like Boff talking about climate change, that just like is, I think, sorely needed in the moment. Like if you pick up most books about climate change that aren't ours, other books though, what you get is like a really, a thoroughgoing scientific analysis of the situation about how much carbon is in the atmosphere or whatever, or the failures of particular types of technology to really like, stand up in the moment where we need the reduction of fossil fuels and everything else. But like what you get with liberation theology that's so interesting is a real moral voice about those things. And that is, I don't know, strangely missing in the conversation. Like it is rare, I think, to find a book that is going to be like, we are living lives that are, producing way too much carbon into our atmosphere, and it is directly responsible for the ways that other people are living lives of extreme poverty. And that's bad. Like, I think that's rare to find in a book. But that's what Boff was all about. That's what Hank Lamart was talking about. That's what Paulo Richard's talking about. That's what we're talking about too. So I think it's important. And, I feel like that moral element, I think, is missing in the climate conversation. So pick up our book, pick up books that are old and out of print liberation theology books, and learn all about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually one reason that we were attracted to the degrowth conversation in particular is actually it does have like, it's a paradigm that wants to talk about that kind of pitch. Like, it's not just the science of climate change. It's like, what's the responsibility of people in the global north? Like, there's a moral kind of angle to that. And also, like, we can't really ignore the profoundly unjust and structurally problematic inequality between the north and south, especially as it relates to consumption and production. So, yeah, that was really interesting, too, to maybe feel like, I don't think degrowth is like a secular version of liberation theology, but it's like kind of close to that. Like they have some very similar impulses. And I mean, as we were writing this book too, there's always a question of whether or not degrowth is worth the trouble as a term and a discourse. It makes people incapable of thinking for some reason. Like, I don't know, the term itself is a negative term that can kind of be a barrier to people actually taking the time to understand in good faith what you're trying to say. And there were definitely moments in the book too, in writing it, where I thought, do we really want to like hitch our wagon to this discourse, which can also produce some weirdos? And is that the kind of weirdo that we want to become? And I think in the end, I still think whatever, degrowth is probably a badly named movement. They shouldn't have done that, but they did, and that's where we're at. And the fact is, like, the collection of kind of, I guess, moral points, or like the constellation of, points of discourse in degrowth, it does mirror really closely the kinds of concerns that liberation theology had in a way that, like, the climate movement doesn't per se. So I think that also was a cool discovery to make.
Yeah, definitely. All right, we have a few minutes left in this podcast. Let's talk about the things that we've learned since then. And I don't know. I don't want to say what would we include in the book that we didn't, but what other vistas or plateaus have opened up since we've written this book that we might investigate more in the future?
A good question. Well, after we finished writing this book, I immediately started reading books about garbage.
Yeah, me too.
And that was very funny. Matt and I both discovered that independently, actually. Just naturally, we both started reading books about garbage. And I don't know, maybe one day I'll write about garbage. We'll write about garbage together, who could say? But that phase has passed. I think maybe I just had to like get that out of my system. Maybe not, though. I don't know. There's a lot to say about garbage. I also ended up reading, and I'm still reading, I've been going through a prolonged phase of reading a ton of like stuff about medieval society. And maybe that's like a leftover of not being able to get the St. Francis stuff out of our system. I'm just like obsessed with trying to reconstruct that whole situation in my brain, and it's so weird and fun. Maybe it's just also basically fantasy escapism from the horrors of our apocalyptic world, but that's part of it. So I don't know, but I think, yeah, learning a bit more about kind of garbage in general, that was big. Oh, and maybe the last thing is we finished writing this book before I went to Brazil for COP30, and I think being there at COP30 actually made me, I wouldn't have changed anything in the book after going, but I think it like made the whole kind of liberation theology and climate catastrophe discussion more real. You know, like I was able to like see it in action, and like seeing Christians and people of faith out in the streets for the climate in the global south in a way that, like, you know, we had read a lot about and I learn a lot about in my daily job, but maybe didn't participate in the same way. So yeah, that's something I had encountered maybe after finishing the book that might have retrospectively changed some of the ways that we talk about stuff. I'm not sure, but that was big. What about you, Matt? What have you learned since?
Wow, so many things. Yeah, garbage was a big one. You know, we were just talking about that, like that figure about the human created mass versus like biological mass. And a lot of that human created mass is garbage. Yeah, I got really interested in like product design and the product design that's like, you know, for consumption, but like products that are designed to be thrown away before they're even used, like paper cups and plastic bottles. That is such an interesting like brainworm that is seemingly undefeatable in our culture. I don't know. We can't quite get over the idea of like buying a glass bottle and then filling it back up or something. It's too hard. We can't quite figure this out. I don't know. We can send people into space again, but we can't figure out how to like reuse containers. Just blows my mind. So that side of things is really interesting. I mean, I think that has a lot to do with degrowth too, that if we could start thinking about it, this seems like such a small thing, but start thinking about the way that we design things, not for immediate discard, but to reuse, we would degrow really quickly. The plastics industry is huge, and we could degrow it by not using so many stupid bottles. I don't know. Seems dumb. Seems like a dumb idea. So there's that. I think the other thing that's interesting about garbage is the ways that you know, we have sort of a throwaway culture, but also the ways that human beings are extremely throwaway. They're very discardable. Not only is the plastic bottle created to be thrown away, but like, you know, there's all kinds of labor that is like disposable, and people's lives are disposable. For a world, you know, that is governed by big institutions like the UN, where we have things like universal human rights, it seems like actually a lot of people's human rights don't matter very much, because capitalism supersedes them, and that sucks. So anyways, these two senses of garbage were really interesting to me. That was a big thing. The other thing that came out of this book is an awful rabbit hole that I'm still kind of trying to figure out what to do with, but I'm not quite smart enough to figure out. So we read this book by Brett Christophers called The Price is Wrong, about like electricity pricing. And it was really helpful in the book to, you know, to understand why, even though renewables can produce a cheaper type of electricity, that doesn't necessarily mean that capitalism will uptake it, because for capitalism, you know, something could be cheap, but if it's not profitable, it doesn't matter. And something being cheap doesn't mean that it is profitable. So that's quite interesting. That sent me down a deep rabbit hole of learning more about energy, and electricity and renewables and markets for those things. That's been quite interesting as well. I've also started, this is kind of like as an aside, I think I fell down that rabbit hole so far that then I started working on a new job in a new campaign that was geared towards questions about electricity and renewables. So it's really become a big part of my brain. Like I think about that kind of a lot now. So I think that's quite interesting. I would love to think more about maybe how all of these ideas connect with regard to a just transition. Something that I think is interesting about degrowth is that it is, it can lend itself towards political solutions that are just a grab bag of like wildly different types of policies to fiddle around with. And that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. We need wildly different policies to, inspire politicians and demand better from politicians. That's all important and necessary. But I guess what I've found in learning more about electricity and renewables and how people are engaging with that from like a grassroots level, what I'm finding is that, policy isn't enough, and a transition that's led by a government is also not enough. We should be thinking about how we can interrupt the ongoing quote unquote just transition as people who are involved in labor unions and other in climate movements and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, quite interested in like just transition things at the moment, and how actual people can influence them, not just like very wonky policy people. Maybe that will be something in the future. If not, I'm still like, it's my day job. So now it's my like biggest concern.
Yeah, I think, that's really what's been interesting in writing the book is like, so it came out of lots of Magnificast conversations that we had, but I think it has also kind of pushed us in some other interesting directions that we might not otherwise have thought about, or like didn't need to think about as clearly. And that's been kind of fun and intimidating at the same time. Like, I feel like we're pretty smart for the most part about a handful of things, but definitely not everything. That's for sure. And like having to learn totally new vocabularies, and in some cases even like disciplines, and just like different sets of like, I guess, concerns, or domains of knowledge production, stuff like that. I think that's been like really kind of cool. Like, we can talk a lot about French philosophy and postmodernism and theology and Christianity or whatever, but it's been fun to kind of like try to learn how to talk more seriously and intentionally about things like climate change and these other kind of opening avenues, waste or energy or whatever it might be. So yeah, it's been like kind of cool to give ourselves permission to like become students of other disciplines and discourses again. And yeah, I don't know, maybe that will turn into another book. Maybe we'll just turn into other podcast episodes, but it's a bit of an Ouroboros, I guess, at this point.
Nice. Well, is there anything else we should talk about, or is that good?
Let's see. Well, okay, the book is out. There are some maybe fun things to say about that. There will be a book launch, a physical book launch here in Toronto in June. The exact date is TBD, but it's coming up very soon. So I don't know, you can watch our social media. We'll probably post it. But Matt is coming all the way from Scotland to Toronto for it. So if you're in the area, you can come to that. I think we're still talking about other ways of kind of getting the word out. Maybe we'll do a virtual book launch or something. We have already done a podcast with Bread and Rosaries. That'll come out in the near future, I guess. We'll be chatting with other people, but I think it'll be fun to like, I guess, use the book as a chance to create more opportunities to think with other folks and talk with other folks. I think that's what I'm most excited about. So we'll be doing a lot of that. You can stay tuned for it. We're still producing also some interesting resources around the book. We made a study guide for it, which is on our website, and we are putting together a zine or two for it. We'll have some print ones at the book launch, but they'll be free to download. And then lastly, in the Discord, we've been, I think maybe that's one thing that we really need to add. We've been thinking with folks in the Discord for a really long time, for years now.
Yeah, that's true.
And a lot of conversations there have really refined the book and made their way into it. Every once in a while, folks in the Discord will organize a book reading club, and Matt usually participates in them. I, for whatever reason, can't organize my life in such a way to do it. But I think like a lot of the discussion in that community has really formed the book. So, that's something we can be really grateful for. And I'm sure that we'll do, some discussion events within the Discord around the book. So if you want to talk more about it with us and with other people who have really made an impact on it, you can do that. You can join the Discord and yeah, I don't know, maybe you'll help us write another book, or we'll help you write your own book, or whatever that looks like. But it's been cool to, like, I guess, have a good reason to feel appreciative of our listener community, and really, like, feel like I hope this is kind of reflective of some of that community discernment and enables it also. It's been fun and frustrating seeing people post pictures that they already have the book long before either Matt and I do. So it's also cool to see people are really curious to see what's in there. So looking forward to carrying that on.
Yeah, mentioning the Discord is such a good point. I didn't think about it until right now. But, I mean, there are big chunks of this book that I think have specifically come out of those conversations. Like, for example, I don't know, not even too long ago, we read Andreas Malm and Wim Carter's book, The Long Heat, and that spurred a lot, like those conversations spurred a lot of things for the book. So it definitely, like, helped shape some of those things. So Discord listeners should feel particularly proud. I don't know. You have some kind of ownership of this book, I guess.
They're in the acknowledgments, though, not specific, because we want to protect your extremely weird Discord tag. We didn't want to put, insert bizarre evangelical reference here in our book acknowledgments, but don't worry, you're all covered under the Discord.
Covered under the Discord, covered under the blood of Jesus Christ. Wow, so many things here. Great. Well, anyways, once again, let me tell you, you should go get the book from Fortress Press. Go ask your favorite weird leftist bookstore. Go ask your library to buy a copy. Ask whoever will listen to check this book out, because it's a good one. I think there's a lot of interesting things in here. Give it to your pastor, give it to your brother, give it to anyone you can think of. And I think you'll be better off for it. It's a great one, and we're excited for everyone to read it. Definitely, like, if you get the book, if you have it, take a picture of it, put it on social media, tell us what you think about it, even if it's a bad thought, or if you think we're wrong, I guess you can tell us that too. But I will insulate myself from that and not believe it. I can't believe after all that work that we'd have gotten something wrong, but you never know. Cool. Excited to see what all the responses are to this whole thing.
Yeah. So get in the Discord. You can do that by going to patreon.com/the Magnificast. And if you support us there at $1 a month or more, you can get your way in there. You can also, I guess, just meet, like I said, a lot of interesting folks, and we'll probably organize a bit of a reading group in there sooner than later. So if that's something you want to do, I suggest you get in that Discord right away so you can get in on the ground floor. I think we can close it off. Our music is by Amari Armstrong, and the outro is by The Illogical Spoon, and we'll see you next week.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up. Keep your hoods up and you stay up